Have you ever felt the ocean watching you? Not just the waves lapping at your feet or the distant cry of gulls, but something deeper, something beneath the silence. That's what Dr. Lena Marrow felt the first time she descended to Sector 7G of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. As the lead marine archaeologist of the deep-sea research vessel Thalassa, Lena had spent the better part of her life chasing ghost stories with sonar and submersibles, but this wasn't a myth she was looking for. It was something that had found her. It started with a signal, a rhythmic, pulsing frequency picked up by their deep-range hydrophones, so old it echoed like a heartbeat slowed by centuries. At first, Lena thought it was geological, volcanic tremors, tectonic chatter, but the pattern didn't fit. It repeated every 12 hours. Exactly. And each time it came, the ocean floor seemed to shiver. Curiosity turned to obsession. With a team of 6 and a submersible named Erebus, Lena dove where no one had dared. Nearly 6 miles below sea level, where pressure crushed steel like tin and light was a myth. The descent was silent, except for the faint clicks of the pressure hull and that rhythmic pulse, now stronger, closer. At 10,227 meters, they saw it. A vast stone arch, etched with carvings that pulsed faintly with bioluminescence, like veins under skin. Beyond it lay ruins, not piles of broken stone, but towers. Intact, still standing in the abyssal dark, Lena's voice trembled as she whispered into the comms, "We've found it. Atlantis." But this was no paradise. The city was alive. Structures undisturbed by time, walls that bled slow trails of black ichor when touched, statues with eyes that didn't seem carved, but grown, faces twisted in terror. And in the center of the city, a dome of obsidian, its surface slick like oil, hummed with that same terrible frequency. One of the crew, Jordan, claimed he heard whispers inside his helmet. "They're speaking inside my head." He started convulsing minutes later, blood filling his visor. They called it pressure sickness. But Lena knew better. The dome was not a building. It was a prison. Through fragmented carvings and alien symbols, Lena began to understand. Atlantis had not sunk from hubris or disaster. It had been buried, sealed, hidden, not to protect us from it, but it from us. They had trapped something there, a consciousness, a sentience older than language. And now, awakened by their presence, it began to listen again. One by one, the crew fell. Some heard voices and wandered into the dark, never to return. Others screamed until their minds simply unraveled. Only Lena remained, drawn to the obsidian dome as if her entire life had been leading to that moment. Inside the dome, there was no gravity, no time. Just a vast chamber of liquid air and a single pulsing heart, suspended in black strands like roots of an ancient tree. She could feel it thinking, learning her, wearing her memories like a cloak. And it spoke, not in words, but in images. Cities burning, oceans rising, children weeping salt. It showed her the future, a world where silence drowned everything. When Thalassa resurfaced weeks later, it was empty. No crew, no wreckage. Just Lena's last log entry, looped on a cracked drive. "We did not find Atlantis. It found us. It waited. It remembered. And now, it's coming home." Some say the signal still pulses, faintly, from beneath the Atlantic. A slow heartbeat in the dark. But no one dares go back. The ocean has a way of swallowing not just ships, but memories. It preserves what it wants, salt-wrapped secrets entombed in darkness, and crushes the rest under pressure so vast, so ancient, it bends the very idea of time. When Erebus began its descent from the belly of the Thalassa, the air on board felt electric. 6 souls, hand-picked, their resumes heavy with accolades, but none prepared for what would wait at the bottom of the world. Lena, calm but focused, recorded her initial observations while the vessel groaned under the shifting water above. Outside the portholes, the light died quickly. Sunlight gave way to twilight, and then to nothing. Only the glow of the instrument panels and the cold, sterile lights mounted to the Erebus's hull stood against the overwhelming black. A depth that felt predatory. Lena kept staring at the monitors. The signal had grown stronger. more articulate. She began to notice nuances in the pulse, slight variations that resembled speech, or perhaps music. Like a choir made of static and drowning breath. Something was down there, and it wasn't dead. At 5,000 meters, frost began to crackle on the inside of the viewports. The pressure outside was 1,000 times greater than sea level. Each creak of the sub's frame felt like a whisper against their eardrums. At 7,000 meters, Jenkins, engineer, skeptic, rational to a fault, began to talk to someone over the internal comms, but there was no one else speaking. "Who are you talking to, Mark?" Lena asked. He looked at her, eyes unfocused. "She says her name is Callan. She's been here a long time." There was no one named Callan aboard. Lena wrote it off as stress, pressure hallucinations, but when she reviewed the recording later, the voice was there, faint, feminine, speaking a language she couldn't understand, yet something in her bones recognized. By the time they passed 9,000 meters, Lena had stopped thinking of it as a signal. It was a call, a lure. The terrain below shifted dramatically. No longer barren rock and sediment, but carved steps, sharp ridges, and geometric formations too deliberate to be natural. The sonar painted an impossible silhouette, pillars rising from the seabed, connected by archways and walls. Atlantis was not a city, but a design, a purpose carved into the ocean floor. Every structure aligned with uncanny precision, spiraling inward toward the black heart of the dome. As the submersible reached the edge of the city, the lights flickered. Not from failure, but interference. A deliberate pulsing wave, like something was warning them, or perhaps welcoming them. "Surface, this is Erebus. We've reached anomaly coordinates. We're preparing to disembark," Lena said into the mic. No response. Only static, and that rhythmic pulse behind it. Deeper now, more resonant. The city awaited, frozen in the stillness of millennia, yet not dormant, not dead. Lena looked at the faces around her. Jordan was praying under his breath. Rima, the linguist, gripped a photo of her son like a talisman. Even Saito, the unshakable military liaison, was pale. And Jenkins, he was smiling. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "She's so lonely." As Erebus docked into a narrow trench just outside the central complex, the crew prepared to enter. Heavy suits, oxygen rebreathers, cameras, but none of them could have prepared for the silence that met them when they stepped out into Atlantis. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of watching. Everything around them hummed at a frequency below hearing, like the low growl of something massive and sleeping just beneath the stone. They moved carefully. Their lights pierced the black, revealing towering structures untouched by time. Murals on the walls depicted strange humanoid figures, elongated, multi-eyed, bowing to a vast, spined entity suspended above them. It had no face, only a mass of tendrils, curling like smoke. Then Rima stopped. Her breath caught inside her helmet. One of the murals had changed. The figures were still there, but now, at the center, was a human woman. Lena, frozen, painted in precise detail, standing before the tendrilled god. It hadn't been there before. They checked the footage. It had changed between frames. Rima turned to Lena, her voice cracking. "We shouldn't be here. We were expected." And far above, on the Thalassa, every system went dark. Above the sunless trench, the Thalassa floated lifeless. No hum of generators, no lights to pierce the surrounding black. The crew topside scrambled in the dark, switching to emergency systems, but even the manual backups refused to respond. It was as if something had reached up from the deep and squeezed the ship's heart into stillness. Below, unaware of their isolation, Lena and her team ventured further into the ruins of Atlantis. The city sprawled in impossible geometries, streets that bent in slow arcs around unseen centers, doorways too narrow for a human chest, buildings shaped like coiled shells and bone flutes. Every structure whispered of design alien to human architecture. Driven by logic that bent space and anatomy alike, the walls sweated a black, iridescent substance that glistened in their helmet lights, and in it, Lena thought she saw reflections of people that weren't there. The deeper they went, the louder the signal became. But now it wasn't just sound, it became presence, pressure. like standing in a cathedral carved from darkness, where every shadow leaned inward, listening. Jenkins moved differently now, more fluid, more certain, as though he knew where to go. Lena tried to question him, but he ignored her. When he walked too close to a sculpted pillar, his gloved hand reached out and traced a spiral embedded in the stone, and it pulsed. The stone responded. Something moved inside it. Rima screamed. Her oxygen monitor spiked. She dropped to her knees, gasping, eyes wide with terror. When Lena rushed to her side, she kept whispering the same phrase over and over through chattering teeth. "They're awake. They're inside the walls. They remember us." Saito tried to contact the Thalassa, but got only static, followed by a deep, wet whisper that slid through the comms like oil through water. A voice that wasn't a voice. "You are the echo," it said. "You are the door." They should have turned back. They should have run. But Jenkins was already moving toward the central dome. The structure loomed above the city like a black sun, its surface glistening like obsidian underwater. No doors, no seams, just that endless dark shell. And yet Jenkins walked to it as if following a remembered path. He touched the surface and it opened, not with a hiss or mechanical sound, but a wet, organic sigh. Inside was a tunnel, narrow, breathing. Lena hesitated, but Jordan followed Jenkins without a word. Then Rima, pale and trembling, pressed forward behind him. Only Saito and Lena remained. "We're not going in there," Saito growled. "Not without knowing what we're walking into." Lena looked at him. "We already did," she said, and then she stepped inside. The air changed immediately, heavier, not quite liquid, but thicker than it should be. The walls pulsated gently, like a throat mid-swallow. The passage curved downward in a slow spiral, lit by bioluminescent veins that ran beneath the surface, pale green and sickly, throbbing to the same rhythm as the signal. As they moved deeper, their thoughts grew louder. Memories surfaced without warning. Rima wept as her son's voice called to her from the walls. Jordan clutched his chest, shouting the name of a brother who'd drowned decades ago. Even Saito, unflinching until now, looked around with growing dread. "They're feeding on us," he said, "using what we love to bring us closer." The passage opened into a chamber, a sphere, vast and hollow, with no visible floor, just a web of black tendrils suspended in the void. In the center hung a mass of tissue, beating, pulsing, wrapped in strands like nerves and roots. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't even truly organic, it was older. Lena stared. Her breath fogged the inside of her visor. And then the heart opened an eye. It had no iris, no pupil. Just layers and layers of colorless, jelly-like membranes that dilated and contracted as it focused on her. And in that gaze, Lena saw it all. The city above, the war that had buried it, the sacrifice of a civilization to bind something not born of earth, but called from the void beyond. It had no name, no shape. It was thought given hunger, and it had been dreaming, until now. The pulse changed, faster, urgent. And from the far side of the chamber, Jenkins knelt before the mass, arms wide, mouth open in silent rapture. He had always been part of it. He had always belonged. Lena screamed his name, but he didn't respond. The tendrils reached for him, slowly, reverently. They caressed his suit, slid beneath his helmet, and then they pulled. The suit crumpled inward like paper. Bone snapped. Blood fogged the air, and Jenkins disappeared, consumed. The walls shook, the dome was waking up. And above, the Thalassa began to sink. On the surface, the Thalassa was no longer adrift. It was descending, slowly, steadily, drawn by an unseen force. The remaining topside crew scrambled to restart systems, but the ship responded like a corpse. Not dead, just unwilling. Outside, the ocean had stilled. No currents, no movement. Even the ever-present groan of the deep had vanished, replaced by a vast and unbearable stillness, like a held breath. The water pressed in from all sides, but it was not pressure in the physical sense. It was attention. The sea was watching. A tremor ran through the hull, gentle at first, then stronger. Lights sparked in the corridor walls as rivets groaned and popped. The ship's lights, long dormant, flickered on for an instant, bathing the bridge in a ghastly red. For a brief, impossible second, every screen showed the same image, an eye. Enormous, lidless, colorless, blinking from beneath miles of salt. And then the ship resumed its descent. Down below, inside the breathing dome of Atlantis, Lena staggered backward from the place where Jenkins had vanished. The void pulsed louder now, throbbing in the marrow of her bones. The eye in the center of the chamber followed her, dilating as if in anticipation. Rima was on her knees, murmuring in tongues. Jordan stood at the edge of the tendril-webbed pit, arms out, as though waiting for his turn to be claimed. Saito pulled Lena back. "We're leaving," he said through clenched teeth. "Now." But the tunnel behind them had changed. The smooth walls had sealed. No exit. No path. The dome had shifted, rearranged its flesh in silence, closing them in. "No way out," Lena whispered, half to herself. "Just like them." And that's when she saw it. Scattered across the edges of the chamber, embedded in the webbing like flies caught in amber. Suits, helmets, faces, other explorers. Their bodies were half dissolved, partially fused to the tendrils, as if fed upon slowly over centuries. One still had its eyes intact, staring in frozen terror, mouth wide in an unheard scream. Rima crawled toward the edge. "He's calling me," she whispered. "My son. He's here." Lena reached to stop her, but Rima moved with inhuman speed, flinging herself into the pulsing net of roots. The mass welcomed her like an old friend, wrapping around her limbs with unnatural gentleness. She didn't scream. She laughed, and then the laughter became a wet gargle, and her voice went silent. The eye blinked once more. Jordan turned next, moving like a sleepwalker into the center of the chamber. But this time, the tendrils didn't wait. They lashed, quick, surgical. His suit split open like ripe fruit. Blood floated in thick globules, slow as syrup, before being drawn into the mass. Absorbed, remembered. Saito raised his rifle. "Back!" he barked. "Back! Whatever the hell you are!" He fired. The bullet cracked through the thick air, hit the mass, and vanished. Swallowed. The eye flinched. Not in pain, but in curiosity. Then came the sound. Not a roar, not a scream. Something between a groan and a choir of whispers, rising from deep within the structure. A sound of recognition, of awakening. Lena clutched her head. The noise vibrated through her skull like nails on wet bone. Her vision blurred. Images poured into her mind, Atlantis in its final days. Rituals conducted in desperation, sacrifices by the thousands. A last, hopeless act to lock this thing away. But the seal had failed. They had come too close, stirred something that had only pretended to sleep. Saito grabbed Lena and pulled her into a crevice along the chamber wall. "There's another path," he growled. "Ventilation or something. We move now, or we end up like..." He didn't finish the sentence. They ran. The tunnel curved away from the main chamber, narrower, more jagged. Here, the walls didn't pulse. They throbbed. Lena could feel a heartbeat not her own vibrating through the stone. A second rhythm, discordant with the first. A twin. And then abruptly, the walls ended. They stood at the edge of a vast cavern, this one not part of the dome but beneath it, larger, colder. And at its center, another structure, older, more primitive. A stone obelisk bound in rusted chains and carved with symbols Lena had only seen in her nightmares. It pulsed in opposition to the thing above, as if resisting, trapping. Something shifted nearby. A figure, slumped, motionless. It was a man, long dead, his suit decayed, visor shattered. But in his hand, clutched tight even in death, was a notebook. Lena took it. Inside, sketches of Atlantis, warnings, dates going back to the 1930s. One phrase repeated again and again, carved deep into the final pages. "If the seal breaks, drown it all. Burn the sky if you must. Do not let it rise." Lena turned to Saito. "We need to flood the dome." He stared at her. "How?" She looked down at the pulsing obelisk. "We wake the other one." The obelisk rose from the seabed like a broken tooth, hunched and scarred by time. It pulsed not with life, but with resistance. A counterbeat, irregular, discordant, clashing with the rhythm of the dome above. Lena felt it in her sternum, like two hearts at war inside her chest. The notebook's final page fluttered in her hand, waterlogged and nearly illegible. But the message was clear. The dome above them, the living structure that had consumed Jenkins, Rima, and Jordan, was not the city's source of power. It was its infection. This obelisk, ancient and half-buried, was Atlantis's original core, a failsafe. The last desperate creation of a dying civilization. It hadn't been designed to hold the entity, but to resist it, to stave off total consumption. A lock, forged in pen, and that lock was failing. Saito circled the structure, scanning it with what little remained of his suit's diagnostic systems. The surface read like biological tissue fused with obsidian and basalt. Seals had been placed in concentric rings around its core, each one vibrating at different frequencies. One of them, a fissure running vertically along the spine, leaked a faint red glow. "This thing isn't stable," he muttered. "If we push it, it could trigger a cascade," Lena finished. They both looked at each other, unspoken realization settling like lead. If they activated the obelisk, if they woke it, it might not just collapse the dome. It might take the entire seabed with it. But they had no choice. The dome had begun to move. Far above, inside the black heart of Atlantis, the entity stirred. Not fully awake, but dreaming louder. Tendrils now roamed the inner halls, feeling, searching. The city walls bled freely, leaving trails of dark ichor that twisted toward the seafloor like veins in search of a body. And the thalassa was nearly upon it. Saito knelt beside the obelisk. He traced the carvings, now faintly glowing under his touch. The surface was warm, not like metal or stone warmed by sunlight, but like flesh, like fevered skin. "What are you doing?" Lena asked. "Matching the signal," he said. "This thing's resonating at a frequency opposite the dome. If I can amplify it, create a feedback loop, it'll rupture. That's the idea." She hesitated. "If it does, we won't make it out." He looked up at her. "I know." Silence. A long, unspoken pause filled with the sound of something breathing above them. Then, Lena stepped forward. "I'll help." Together, they connected the remaining power cells from their suits to the base of the obelisk. The lights on their visors dimmed immediately. The air grew thicker, vibrating with rising tension. The obelisk's beat accelerated, irregular and furious, as if realizing it was being forced to wake. And then it screamed. Not through air, not through sound, but through thought. A telepathic shriek that rippled outward like a psychic tsunami. Lena collapsed to her knees, vision swimming. Her mind filled with images of fire, salt, and bone. Children torn apart by shadows. A city drowning not in water, but in voices. Above, the dome reacted. It roared, not with pain, but defiance. Walls flexed, floors cracked, the tendrils withdrew from their search and coiled inward. The eye reappeared, dilating with fury. It felt the obelisk's awakening, and it remembered what had once tried to bind it. The city began to collapse. Sections of buildings sank into themselves. Spires twisted and imploded. The dome rippled, then cracked, slowly at first, then all at once. A wave of pressure burst outward, shattering columns and sending tremors into the ocean floor. The obelisk shook violently, each pulse now like a hammer blow against the sea itself. Saito screamed into the comms, "It's working! Keep it going!" But Lena didn't respond. She was somewhere else. Inside her mind, the entity had grabbed her, pulled her down into a space without dimension. No body, no light, just consciousness. And in that place, she stood face to face with it. It had no form, only intention. Hunger shaped like memory. It showed her the birth of the universe, the first light devoured by the first darkness. It had come from beyond stars, born in the quiet between atoms. Atlantis had merely found it, and it had waited ever since for a voice loud enough to carry it back. And she was that voice. "You came for me," it said. Not in words, but in understanding. "You opened the door." Lena screamed, refused, fought. But it was inside her now. And it wanted to rise. Back in the physical world, the obelisk cracked. A shockwave burst through the seabed, and from deep beneath a fissure opened, a chasm splitting the ruins in half. The dome wailed. The thalassa, now directly overhead, was caught in the eruption. A pillar of water and light surged from the city, hurling the ship upward like a toy. Metal tore, glass shattered, and then silence. Lena collapsed beside the obelisk, blood trickling from her nose. Saito dragged her up. "We triggered it," he said, coughing. "Now we run!" But there was nowhere left to run. The dome had begun to collapse inward, folding on itself like dying lungs. The tendrils retreated, the eye dimmed, and the entity, trapped once more, screamed in defeat. Or perhaps in promise. Because as the city fell, as the sea filled with dust and black water, Lena heard one final whisper. This was never the only door. The collapse echoed like thunder through miles of ocean, a soundless roar that rippled through pressure and bone. The city of Atlantis, a place whispered in myth and derision for millennia, was tearing itself apart in total silence. Walls twisted inward, drawn by unseen gravity, as though some core had reversed its pull. Stone melted like wax under invisible fire. Structures aged and crumbled in an instant, returning to the dust they once defied. But Lena and Saito were still alive. Clinging to the edge of the fracture near the broken obelisk, Lena's hands trembled from more than exhaustion. Her vision flickered, fractured between this world and another. That thing inside the dome. It hadn't left. It had simply moved, hidden deeper. Or worse, spread. "We triggered something bigger than we thought," Saito said, eyes scanning the devastation. "This wasn't a kill switch. It was a flare." Lena tried to speak, but words collapsed in her throat. Instead, she pointed upward. Light. Faint and trembling, it seeped through the collapsing ceiling above them. Not natural light, mechanical. Flickers of dying circuitry, emergency beacons from the thalassa. It had survived. Part of it. The vessel now drifted just above the rupture zone, broken but still intact. Like a lifeboat trapped in an undertow, it pulsed with the last glimmers of human engineering, holding out against the darkness as the ruins of Atlantis folded into oblivion below. "We can make it," Saito said, voice thin through the comms. "Short-range thrusters might still be functional. If we launch from that ledge, we can hit the upper trench wall and climb." Lena nodded, though her vision kept splitting. Every time she blinked, the shadows moved. They weren't just darkness anymore. They watched her, followed her movements, waiting. The swim to the ledge felt like hours compressed into seconds. Her limbs moved mechanically, mind barely tethered to her body. Somewhere behind them, a tremor ruptured what remained of the obelisk, and with a groaning finality, it sank into the earth. Gone. And with it, the last remnants of Atlantis's defiance. Once inside the hull of the thalassa, the silence was worse. The kind of silence that carries aftershocks, that drips like water from a cracked ceiling into your ears, one drop at a time. The ship was a skeleton of itself, gutted by pressure, oxygen reserves running low. No sign of the topside crew. Just the windless echo of the ship mourning its dead. Yet somehow, the central core still flickered, screens bathed in static. Saito got to work immediately, rerouting what little energy remained toward propulsion and signal boost. Lena collapsed into a chair near the bridge, forcing her thoughts to remain heard. But it wasn't working. Every panel, every flicker of static, every hum of failing power lines, it was speaking, not with words, but symbols, patterns. Like fingerprints of a thought pressed into metal. She saw faces, Jenkins, Rima, Jordan, alive in impossible configurations of code, as if the ship had recorded them, or worse, rebuilt them. The static cleared, and then a voice. Not from the speakers, from inside her own head. "You carried me," it whispered, "through blood and stone and salt. You wore me like a key." Lena froze. Saito looked over. "What? What is it?" But she couldn't answer. Her throat wouldn't move. She felt her pulse begin to slow, like her heart was listening to someone else's rhythm. "It's inside the comms," she gasped. "It's not dead, just dormant. And we—" Her voice cracked. "We're the signal now." Saito's face hardened. "Then we destroy the comms." He moved toward the console, fingers shaking over the circuit breakers. "No!" Lena shouted suddenly. "Wait!" Too late. Saito flipped the master relay. The lights died. The hum ceased. And for one terrible moment, the ocean outside went utterly black. Then it responded. The water boiled. Not in heat, but motion. Shapes moved beyond the hull, fast and deliberate, like predators circling. The ship groaned as if being dragged. Something outside scraped against the metal, writing, leaving glyphs and streaks of unknown light. The power returned, not by their hand, but its screens blinked alive, now filled with scrolling text in that same impossible language. The comms flared with sound, static layered with human voices. Jenkins, Rima, Jordan, overlapping, repeating one word, open. Saito stepped back, eyes wide. Lena, we didn't shut it in, we let it out. The realization hit like ice. Atlantis had not been a cage. Not entirely. It had been a beacon, a lure, a way to pull others in, and test them, break them. Let the worthy carry the seed of something older. Lena was the key, and the door had opened. She clutched her chest. The beat inside her no longer matched her own. It was foreign, steady, rhythmic, waiting. Saito stared at her. What did it give you? Lena didn't answer. She couldn't, because the answer wasn't hers anymore. The thalassa drifted like a wound, open, bleeding, floating just above the ruins of Atlantis. Inside its dim halls, the shadows had grown patient. They no longer moved with the frantic hunger of awakening, but with a calculated slowness. They were waiting, watching. Waiting for Lena to choose. She sat on the edge of the bridge, eyes unfocused, listening to something only she could hear. A soft thrum beneath her skin, synchronized perfectly with the hum of the ship's dying systems. Each pulse brought clarity, not her own thoughts, but impressions. Fragments of languages, glimpses of ruins that had never existed on Earth, cities under red stars, bones that sang. Saito paced nearby, hands shaking, trying to suppress his own rising panic. Every movement, every light flicker, every shudder of the hull echoed like footsteps in a cave, distant but growing louder. She's not herself, he muttered to no one, or maybe to what he feared she'd become. Lena, talk to me. You've got to fight this. She turned to him slowly. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something deeper, something alive. I'm not the one they chose, she said softly. I'm the one they found. What the hell does that mean? He snapped, voice cracking. We came down here to study a myth. Now you're telling me it's inside you? Like a parasite? She smiled. Not warm, not cruel, just tired. It's not a parasite, it's a reminder, a piece of something we were never supposed to touch. And now it wants to see. Saito backed away. I should have let you die down there, he said. You still can, she replied, without heat. But then, the ship shuddered. A deep groan from its spine, as if something massive had brushed against it from the outside. Saito ran to the monitors. All external cameras were down, except one. It showed the sea around them, glowing faintly red. Sediment swirled like blood in a wood, and in the distance, movement. Not fish, not whales. Structures, floating through the water, as though risen from another time. Buildings, spires, walls etched with the same runes they'd seen below. And among them, shapes, humanoid, faceless, gliding toward the ship in synchronized silence. They're following us, Saito whispered. The city, it's rebuilding. Lena walked toward the screen, her reflection merging with the glowing structures. No, she said. It never left. It just needed a vessel. The red glow intensified. Static erupted across the ship's systems. The pressure outside spiked, and the hull groaned under the strain. Alarms began to wail, not from human input, but triggered by something else. The thalassa was being pulled, not down, outward. Saito's breath fogged his visor. This isn't gravity. This is... Translation, Lena finished. She turned to him. It's not just buried in our ocean. It's in every ocean, every world, waiting for the signal. She held up her arm. Her veins pulsed with a dark light, the beat no longer human. I am the signal. Saito pulled his sidearm. "You're not Lena anymore." Her gaze didn't waver. "No, I'm what comes next." And then the ship screamed. The ocean outside burst into fractal light, folding in on itself as if the water were tearing. Not boiling, but rending. Reality twisted, showing glimpses of a place not meant to be seen. An endless sea beneath a black sky, stars arranged in runes, shapes that moved without motion. The thalassa began to fragment, floor panels peeled like skin. Steel wept rust. Lights bent inward like pupils dilating toward a void. Outside, the faceless shapes pressed their hands against the hull, thousands of them, each one identical, as if made from a single mold. And Lena was no longer standing. She was floating, levitated by unseen force, her body backlit by red glow, hair drifting as though underwater, eyes pitch black. Her voice echoed now, layered and choral. "We are the silence between breaths." Saito aimed his weapon. "Then I'll be the scream," he fired. But the bullet never reached her. It stopped midair, shivered, and turned. Curled like a paper burning inward. Disappeared. Lena drifted forward. Saito backed into the emergency bay, slamming the manual override on the escape pod. It hissed open, revealing a single-seater, barely operational. "Run," she said. Saito hesitated, and then the ship buckled. A final rupture split the deck. Flames burst from the floor, and water began to flood through every broken seal. The ocean wasn't outside anymore. It was coming in. He climbed into the pod and sealed it, his last sight of Lena frozen on the monitor, hovering in the collapsing bridge, calm amidst chaos. And then he launched. The pod screamed through the water, spiraling upward, systems failing, oxygen low. But he was ascending. Behind him, the thalassa exploded inward, folding like a black flower, pulled into the ocean's wound. And from that wound, something followed. The escape pod hurtled upward through a tunnel of imploding pressure. Lights flickered, cracked oxygen seals hissed their final reserves, and the reinforced glass of the viewport groaned under the mounting strain. But none of that mattered to Saito. All he could see was the glow. It pulsed from below, not fading as it should, but following. Red tendrils of light coiled through the water behind him like grasping nerves. At the center of it all, barely visible through the turbulence, a shape began. Not a ship, not a creature. Something between. Something becoming. He activated the distress beacon. Survivor, thalassa. Priority 1. Hostile. Entity. Rising from... A crack split the viewport. Tiny. Hairline. But it wept blood. Not his. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. The crack was gone. The ocean above him shimmered with the first signs of daylight, refracted through miles of water. But even here, near the surface, something was wrong. The water felt thick, still, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Then, the pod breached. It launched into the early morning air with a guttural hiss, arching skyward like a dying scream, then slammed down onto the waves with a force that rattled Saito's spine. For a moment, everything was still. Blue sky, cold wind, the faint crackle of the pod's fried electronics. He was alive. He laughed. A single broken sound. Relief tried to bloom in his chest, but it was strangled before it could fully form, because the sky above him was wrong. There were no clouds, no birds, just silence. And then he looked back. The ocean behind the pod had split, not parted like water against a hull, but opened like a vertical wound. A black chasm in the sea, rimmed with red light. From within, a shape began to rise. First the edges, sharp and organic, like coral fused with bone. Then towers, spires that twisted like tendons, glass domes that blinked like eyes. The entity had taken Atlantis' remains and rewoven them into something new. Something meant to be seen. Lena stood atop the highest point, arms spread like wings, hair flowing upward against gravity. Her skin glowed faintly with that inner light, and her eyes, two wells of pitch, locked onto the pod. She had risen, not with machines, not with help, but with will. And as she did, the sea responded. All around, the water began to change. Froth turned black. The waves lost their rhythm. A whale surfaced nearby, only to roll belly up, lifeless, as its eyes bled darkness. Schools of fish convulsed and vanished beneath the waves. The sea rejected its own children. Lena's voice echoed, not in the air, but in Saito's mind. "You think you've escaped." He clutched his skull, blood seeping from his nose. "You were never meant to leave. You were meant to carry." The beacon in the pod chirped once, a signal locked, a connection established, and then static. The screen flickered with a strange waveform, a perfect loop, repeating over and over. The same pulse they'd first recorded, the heartbeat. Saito slammed the comms. "Anyone! Anyone! This is Lieutenant Saito, last survivor of the Thalassa. Do not approach the mid-Atlantic coordinates. I repeat, do not approach. It's not dead. It's not trapped. It's free," he gasped. "And it's learning." The response came 2 minutes later. A voice, clean, calm. "Message received, Lieutenant. Extraction en route. Hold position." But it wasn't right. The tone was off. Too perfect. Artificial. He listened again. The same phrase repeated, but this time, the voice used his own. It was mimicking him, recording, repeating, spreading. The screen blinked again. New coordinates began to appear. Not one, hundreds, thousands. All across the globe, submarine beacons lighting up like fireflies. Under the Arctic shelf, the Marianas Trench, the ruins of Yonaguni, Lake Baikal. Lena's voice again. We were not the first. Saito watched in horror as the ocean in every direction began to shimmer. Not from wind, but from emergence. Atlantis was not unique. It was a pattern, a seed, and the surface was just the beginning. The sea was no longer a surface. It had become a membrane, thin, strained, and alive, stretched tight over a swelling pulse that threatened to burst. From the fragile confines of the escape pod, Saito watched the horizon dissolve into a writhing curtain of silhouettes, like cities awakening beneath the waves, not rising but unfolding, as if the ocean had always hidden not ruins, but organs. He tried to re-establish contact with the satellite uplink, but the signal was no longer. The coordinates that had begun as a trickle now poured like blood from a wound, cascading across every screen, each line a different place, a different awakening. The pod's onboard AI, originally designed to operate in multilingual distress, began to loop in languages he didn't recognize. Sharp, guttural sounds blended with melodic intonations, forming phrases that hurt to hear. The words weren't just foreign, they were wrong, as if pulled from something older than speech, meant for mouths that no longer existed. He knew what this meant. Atlantis wasn't an anomaly, it was a design repeated throughout Earth's deepest places. And now, the act of unsealing one had triggered a resonance, an awakening like nerves firing across a global spine. Each ancient site had not simply buried the same entity, but a facet of it, a thought, a fragment. Now those thoughts were merging, calling to each other across trenches and fault lines, preparing to form a whole. Lena hadn't risen alone. She was just the first. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with the slow spread of an unnatural twilight. The sun itself seemed to hesitate at the edges of the sky, dimming as if repelled. Saito could feel it in his teeth, the pitch of something massive turning in the deep, dragging continents by inches. The ocean beneath his pod churned with such unnatural stillness that even the wind refused to disturb it. Below, cities built by no known culture reached toward the surface. They weren't ruins, they were preparations, infrastructure for an emergence. In the quiet hum of the pod, Saito felt the first symptoms. A low thrumming in his ears, the unmistakable echo of the signal that had first pulled them to Atlantis. It was different now, slower, deeper, deliberate, as though it knew it had been heard. He pressed a hand to his chest and flinched. The beat beneath his ribs was no longer entirely his own. It skipped, adjusted, fell into sync with the pattern that now throbbed through every signal wave, every frequency on Earth. He looked again at the screen. The world map was no longer flat, it was folded. Sites of emergence had begun to form a spiral, one that did not adhere to tectonic logic. This wasn't a geological phenomenon, it was intentional, a design written into the bones of the planet. Every major body of water acted as a lens, reflecting something beneath, a space that did not exist in conventional dimensions. Lena had said it wasn't just a creature. She was right. It was an intelligence coiled through time itself, using ancient cities like nerve endings. Panic should have taken him. He should have screamed, smashed the systems, thrown himself into the sea. But he didn't. He couldn't. Not just from exhaustion, but because the thought inside him wasn't just his anymore. He could feel her, Lena, still tethered to him through whatever the entity had planted. Memories that weren't his, shared across an unknowable consciousness. It didn't just carry her thoughts. It carried intention. Then the sea shifted. Not in waves, but in contour. A depression formed a mile to the east, then another, deeper and more jagged to the west. The ocean folded inward, then down, revealing not land but structures. Symmetrical towers, rings of obsidian etched with shifting runes, platforms that rotated slowly as if waiting for something. And above them, sky that bent. The stars had rearranged themselves. New constellations blinked into being, forming patterns that tugged at Saito's most primal fear, the fear of recognition without understanding. He activated the pod's emergency self-destruct, a last resort, designed to vaporize sensitive tech in case of capture. It would obliterate the onboard systems, erase the coordinates, sever the signal, temporarily. But he hesitated, because as his finger hovered above the command, Lena's voice emerged again, no longer disembodied. It was her, whispering directly into his skull. "You're not ending it," she said. "You're just removing yourself from it." He whispered through clenched teeth, "You're not real." But she laughed, soft and knowing. "You are." And he understood. The signal couldn't be stopped because it wasn't traveling through wires. It was traveling through minds, carried in dreams, memories, fear. Every person who heard it became a relay. Every survivor, a beacon. And he, Saito, was the most dangerous of them all. Not because he survived, but because he understood. He didn't destroy the pod. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew that the message had already been sent. Night fell like a curtain of ink over the Atlantic, thick and unnaturally swift. The stars above Saito shimmered with a chilling vibrancy, too symmetrical to be natural. They arranged themselves into spirals and sigils, ancient diagrams meant not to be seen, but remembered. It was a night that breathed, not in gusts or winds, but in pulses, slow and tidal, echoing from the depths of the ocean below. The pod floated without direction, its instruments fried by the very signal it had once sought. Saito sat in silence, the display screen still whispering static interlaced with voices he no longer trusted. Lena's presence lingered, no longer separate, but fused with his inner monologue. He couldn't tell where her thoughts ended and his began. Sometimes he would remember details from her past, things he had never lived, yet grieved. A childhood in Maine, a fear of deep water, her first dive, her last breath. He wasn't alone inside himself. The stars above blinked, and in the wake of their light, shapes moved across the water. Not boats, not birds, structures, tall and thin, like towers drifting just beneath the surface, their reflections too sharp, too deliberate. The ocean shimmered, then parted again, just slightly, as if something massive was inhaling from beneath the crust of the earth. And then the voice came. Not Lena's, not even human. It didn't speak in a language. It didn't need to. It impressed itself upon the mind like a hand pressing into clay. It carried weight, purpose, inevitability. This world remembers us. You are the echo. You are the vessel. And through you, we will be known. Saito tried to scream, tried to fight, but his muscles refused. His breath slowed, matching the rhythm that now guided not just his heart, but his thoughts. He was being tuned, like an instrument. The stars blinked again. All around the world, others began to feel it. In a research base above the Arctic shelf, scientists suddenly paused, their eyes glazing as the aurora above them twisted into symbols that no civilization should have known. In a submarine patrolling the Marianas Trench, sonar officers screamed as the seafloor opened and a voice whispered through the steel hull. "We remember." In a village by Lake Baikal, Fishermen dropped their nets and stared at the water's still surface as it began to sing. It was happening everywhere. Atlantis was not a city. It had never been. It was an interface. A way to look into something so vast it could only be understood in pieces. Until now. Humanity had completed the pattern. Saito's pod, now drifting toward the edge of what remained of the mid-Atlantic ridge, crossed over a trench freshly torn into the seabed. Below, faint lights danced. Not mechanical, but organic. They pulsed with recognition as he passed overhead. He was expected. Somewhere within the abyss, Lena waited. Not as she was, but as she had become. She had not been consumed. She had been translated. And Saito understood. This was not invasion. This was assimilation. The earth had been seeded, prepared. And now the roots had found each other. The voices, those whispers buried in myth, dream, madness. They were not relics. They were beacons, anchors dropped into the psyche of mankind, waiting for the moment when enough minds, enough souls, had brushed the edge of understanding. And now, they had. The signal would not stop. Not because it couldn't, but because it wasn't meant to. It had never been about stopping. It had always been about spreading. Saito felt the warmth rise through his chest. His breath grew shallow, but not from fear, from release. His mind expanded outward, folding into something vast and intricate. He could feel Lena's thoughts again, but more than that, he felt others, countless others, all speaking in silence, all remembering. And the last thing he saw, before the stars collapsed inward and the ocean swallowed the last edge of the sky, was himself reflected in the pod's broken glass, smiling, not with joy, but with recognition. Because in the end, Atlantis had never been lost. It had been waiting.